cape.
Welcome Wargamers, this is Doug, and today we are taking a look at the lore of the Fyreslayers in the Age of Sigmar. This is without a doubt one of the most highly requested videos on the channel. I'm going to throw some of the names up here. There are dozens more people who requested this. I have just had the hardest time getting my hands on a battle tome. Now, as always, if you have something you'd like discussed, such as a lore topic or a review of a product, click subscribe, leave it in the comments down below. I read every single comment and I use many of them as inspiration for future videos. But today we're focusing on the descendants of Grimnir, so let's dig in. Now, as with all of my lore reviews, kind of this new format we've been trying a few times here, we're going to kind of go over some facts about the army so that you have a general idea of what they are like. But then also what I really want to focus on is why they are interesting. A lot of times, you know, these lore videos you'll find on YouTube for 40k, 30k, Warhammer Fantasy, Age of Sigmar, all those things, they kind of just spit facts at you. But what I want to suggest to you is that facts alone don't make an army interesting. So what we've been trying to do here is discuss the facts to give you some ideas of the army, but then really discuss why these are narratively important, how they drive events in the storyline, why they're interesting to read about. Really, it's adding the flavor behind those facts. Now, the story of the Fyreslayers really starts back in the Age of Myth. Okay, this is where we have everything's going great. All the gods get along. There's a big pantheon. Even Nagash is on board. Things are going great. Okay, there's two Duardan gods. There's Grimnir and Grugni, which is how I'm going to pronounce that. Now, they're two very different facets of Duardan culture, right? Grimnir, who we're going to be focusing on mostly today, is very passionate, very say violent, but not like loses his head kind of warrior. It's all about fighting the best beast, the most honor, the most glory, being the best, the biggest, not letting his size get him down. Very, like I said, passion, lots of fire is his theme, aggression, things like that. And his brother, Grugni, it has the same temperaments but turned differently. He's much more of the artisan, the craftsman. He's the kind of where we get the general idea of Duardan having like access to the best weapons and the finest armor, that real, like I said, craftsman level work where he puts that same passion and energy into weapons of war and tools and things like that. And so they're kind of the two sides of what we know as Duardan. Well, here's the thing. It's kind of hard to keep a hot-headed mess contained in a pantheon. So Grimnir, who, like I said, we're focusing on mostly with Fyreslayers, starts getting really anxious because things are going so well. Right? He's bored. He's a warrior god. He wants to be out there mixing it up. So he goes to Sigmar and says, "You need to point me at something. Okay, you need to give me a fight." So Sigmar looks across the land. Obviously, he wants to maintain peace, so letting him fight something is going to help. Let him get that anxious anger out. He points towards what I'm assuming is a god beast. Okay, something of immense size, something ridiculously big, to kind of keep him occupied. And this beast is called Volcatrix. Volcatrix is basically a giant molten dragon. Okay, there's some art of him. You can look it up online. Think of like a colossal magma salamander, right? He's just like a living volcano, and that's pretty legit. So Grimnir is all too happy to be challenged by this thing. He runs up there, picks a fight, and they have an epic clash. I mean, this is literally god level fighting right here. It goes on for days, mountains are leveled, all the epic stuff that we hear about. Well, at the very end of this fight, something pretty unique happens amongst the pantheon of these stories that we've seen so far. The two pretty much run at each other. I'm assuming this like bull charging, smash into each other so hard that they both fracture. They both pretty much explode. So you have the essence of a god, Grimnir, and then Volcatrix being like made of metals and rocks and things like that. When he shatters, he busts into a bunch of gold. Now, when the two things infuse with one another, what you get is the essence of a god trapped and bound two pieces of gold that are then hit so hard that they shoot all across the different realms. This is a cataclysmic explosion. And with that, the Fyreslayers were born, because now their god, these are the followers of Grimnir specifically, not Grugni as well, they're trying to piece together their god by hunting down these pieces of gold that have his essence and releasing that essence from the tangible gold. Now, it's also important to note here, this is actually where they developed the tradition of working alongside Magmadroths, who are perceived to be the son of Volcatrix. They're kind of the idea, they're kind of the mythos they have built up is, our destinies are inherently intertwined, so we'll work with you if you work with us, as they say to these hyper-intelligent Magmadroths. And so that's kind of how that relationship is born. Now, what this gives us, first of all, is a clear motivation, right? They want to collect the pieces of their god. Now, what's interesting is that this can represent itself in a myriad of ways. People were a little put off when Fyreslayers were first announced and kind of some concept ideas, I want to call them, were released, and they were depicted much more as mercenaries than as good guys. Well, a lot of the old school Dwarven players, dwarves back in Warhammer Fantasy Battles, were very upset about this because dwarves have always been a honorable race, right? Always doing the right thing, lending support when needed, fighting for good reasons and things like that, keeping their oath. So having a mercenary side of things, it kind of put a damper on some of their opinions. And what I think is important, and it's very clearly written in this book, is that they still have that. They are still good and honorable. They are people of order. But what adds depth to them is the fact that every time they do something good for anyone, right, that might be their mission, but they always have this secret mission in the back, which is to get Urgold, which is what they call gold that is infused with the essence of Grimnir. Urgold. So you have this kind of dual motivation thing, right? Yes, they can work as mercenaries. If the bad guys have Urgold, they'll do whatever it takes to get it. If that means working with them once or twice, yes. If the bad guys collapse on the deal, they're the first ones to kill them for honor's sake. But what it does is it really allows these guys to be in a myriad of odd positions within the universe, a lot of different stories to tell, because their motivation is so clear and their desire for Urgold supersedes their desire to be good, quote unquote, by other people's standards. Okay, so let's take a minute and talk about Urgold, right? So you have the essence of a god shattered into a bajillion little pieces, shot across mortal realms. What is the purpose of this stuff? Well, immediately after Volcatrix and Grimnir fought and shattered or whatever, people didn't really know that Urgold was a thing. They encountered some pieces of gold after the fallout of this, I'd imagine, and realized there was something unique about it. It gave them a slight, little charge, a little power boost by having it, on their possession when they would fight. But it wasn't until some clever little runesmith actually melted this gold into the shape of a Grimnir rune, like some kind of tribute to Grimnir himself, that this thing went up to 11. They realized that, if I put this on my hammer becomes exponentially way better at smashing things. If I put it on, an axe, I can throw the axe farther, all these kinds of ways of manipulating the energy that's inside this stuff. Then someone realized if you put it in your skin, you go like Super Saiyan, right? You go mega charged full of the god's power. And that's really cool, because what you're saying is your god isn't here, but you're still tapping into him in some way, in a very tangible way. But there are a few things about Urgold that are very clear, one of which is you can use up the power inside of it. If you use up the power, say you put it in your forearm and you just start mega punching people really hard and it burns out of power, now you just got a piece of gold in your arm. You can take that out, melt it down to something else, or use it as obviously currency. But you got to put a piece of new Urgold in your skin to get that power back. It's also very clear that it is a finite resource. They didn't, when Volcatrix and Grimnir exploded, they didn't, turn into a multiplying resource that's just everywhere. No, it is finite. There are a number of pieces somewhere, someone knows the number, that they are trying to collect for the purpose of kind of putting Grimnir back together. Now, here's the thing. It's never talked about in the book, but I think it warrants a conversation of what happens when they use Urgold. They state that it can be used up and that you need to put more in to be able to charge yourself. My assumption is that as you use the power of Grimnir, you're kind of like releasing it into the universe, and that once all of it's been released from gold, he'll kind of come back together. It's never expressly said, because if you just read it and take it as it is, it kind of seems like they're using Grimnir as fuel, and once they use it all up, he's just dead, which I don't think is obviously what they intended. So my working theory as far as motivation goes is that they want to use the gold to release the essence of Grimnir from it, so that then he can be reconstituted and they can have their god back. And so kind of getting more practical about how the Fyreslayers operate, well, they are a patriarchy. You have a rune father in the lead, and he has his many, many sons. The sons, he has as many as he can, so he can pit them against each other to find the best leader, so that when he dies or he moves along, retires, whatever, you'll have the best choice of people to come take his place. When a new rune son is elevated to rune father, there's usually always a little schism. This is when sons will take, their immediate family and friends, break off and make new lodges. It's perfectly natural. They don't hate each other for it. But that is how new lodges form. So you have, like I said, an average lodge, a rune father, many sons, kind of this whole format based around manipulating Urgold. They have entire offices dedicated to, okay, your job is to find it. Okay, your job is to mold it into runes and stuff like that. You have a bunch of different warrior classes that all use Urgold in various ways. Like I said, this little micro society really is built upon finding, using, and then finding again Urgold by any means necessary. So it's not terribly deep on their kind of organizational structure. It seems very simple, very tribalistic. Like I said, almost like you would look at some Native American tribes where they have, a shaman who is kind of the rune master equivalent. Then you have a chief who be the rune father, and so forth. And so you have this kind of very loose structure where we're all warriors, but one guy's in charge. They seem to be somewhat mobile, although it's not really hinted at how they would move the forges. But they do appear everywhere. Also important to note, they are in every single realm. These guys, when they split off and develop new lodges, they go pretty far away. In the Battle Tome, they list out like some example lodges you can kind of get, develop ideas and inspirations with that. They're in every single realm, even realms that the books and narratives have not even touched yet. So that's really, really cool. You really do have a free range. Like, all the depictions of them are with fire, so you think, oh, they're all in Akshi. It's just not true. They're actually everywhere. And the last thing I want to bring up about the actual lodges structure themselves is that they are actively growing. So a lot of things in Age of Sigmar, when the game was first introduced to us, it seemed like the world had been stagnant for hundreds of years, right? The Age of Chaos came in, smashed everything down. It seemed like no factions were thriving or doing well or kind of existing beyond like kind of meager sustenance. The Fyreslayers actually did fairly well. They can hide. They're small enough to be roving. They can kind of transport themselves. They can work with the bad guys if the bad guys have what they want. So they kind of are very flexible in the Age of Chaos, and so I think they did fairly well. But what's interesting here is that one of the inspirational lodges that they gave you, without any much detail or context for it, is actually called the Tangrim Lodge, and they were actually started after the Age of Sigmar had begun. So this is something that's kind of point out the fact that they are a thriving, quote-unquote thriving, but expanding race, that they're on the upswing, that they're not crushed and defeated in the corner, right? This isn't a last stand type thing. This is life. This is the life they've known, and they're still doing it. And really, those are the main facts without going unit by unit about why the Fyreslayers are interesting, right? I mean, that's kind of facts about them, really. Highly mobile lodges with a patriarchy system, moving around the realms, searching for Urgold to reconstitute the pieces of their god. That's kind of the elevator pitch for it. What that doesn't encapsulate is really why they're interesting and what makes them narratively stand out from other armies. And that's what we're going to transition into right now. Here's the thing, we had a great talk about identity when we talked about Stormcast Eternals, right? That was kind of their keyword, was identity. This notion that their identity of who they are has been somewhat taken away from them, and every time they die it gets chipped away even more. With the Fyreslayers, in relation to their god, they have a very unique situation. In fact, they're almost identical to Bone Splitters in relation to Gorka Morka. See, the idea that you have a god, okay, and this is a narrative, a universe where races identify so closely with their particular gods. You have one, but he's not there. You can't call on him for aid. He'll never come, right? He's gone functionally from the game, much like Slaanesh or Gorka Morka, whatever. But he's there. You have an identity. You have a lot invested in that identity as a follower of him. Your entire life, worldview, and society is built into this, but he's not there. Now, we talked about the Stormcast Eternals, how they must think it's crazy that the Sylvaneth kind of had a hand in shaping Alariel, their god. That they can choose how she develops, like what kind of season she kind of develops into, so they kind of planted her and she grew into the season of war, so now she's like ready to roll. In this likewise, they encounter Sigmar on a daily basis, but these guys, the Fyreslayers, don't encounter their god. In fact, they are the ones taking the initiative, the upper hand, and searching for him, which kind of puts them in the primary position. No Stormcast Eternal is ever going to be in a position where they can get rid of Sigmar and then just keep him in a closet, right? I mean, keep him locked away somehow or something like that and still draw from his power. Whereas the Fyreslayers, if they wanted to, they could just stop using Urgold. They could stop looking for Grimnir and focus on Grugni. There's a lot of things, but so they don't need him, right, functionally, but they want him. And this drives a lot of cool narratives they have. They want to search the realms. They want to go work for bad guys to get the Urgold. They want a myriad of weird situations that put them in weird places and working with strange people to get what they want. They need their identity, right? It's so fixated to them that this is their mission in life, that's what they need to do. So kind of bringing my point back in, what I think is fascinating about the Fyreslayers is you get this narrative of a godless, functionally godless race of people in a universe and a narrative setting that focus heavily on relation to your patron god. Then you get this added layer of, well, not only are they functionally godless, but they are kind of the ones taking command, where other gods, imbue their strength into their warriors. I mean, the Fyreslayers get the strength of Grimnir, but it's not because he is so great a blessing that he pours it out upon them, right? They're just using him as a resource, which kind of gives them the upper hand in terms of like a bartering or narrative situation. And lastly, that it puts them in strange positions to be able to do all kinds of interactive narrative things in the Age of Sigmar with a variety of people. I think the same goes for the Bone Splitters and any kind of Slaaneshi force, whether it's mortal or demon, that they have a very unique place in the universe simply because of their relation to their god. Now, here's the question. What happens, say hypothetically, if they get all the pieces, right? If you spend all the Urgold, what happens? Because one, your primary resource for power, say like, let's call Urgold ammunition, right? Because it kind of strengthens them and makes them who they are. Your primary ammunition's gone, but you get a god back. Now, this is a god that kind of, in a way, owes you something because you just spent millennia putting him back together, but there's no promise of that. And there's also no promise that there's going to be any kind of empowerment, reward, anything like that for doing what they did. So it's interesting that they're spending all this time and energy and faith and devotion towards a goal that seems somewhat unclear. Now, I will say that this book came out early in the Age of Sigmar release cycle. A lot of that lore and narrative back then, it didn't feel as complete as it does now. But as we're kind of filling in the gaps looking backward, we're seeing that this is like a super unique faction within the realms. Several other battle tomes have come out and none of them have the same feel, where it's imagery that is fiery and passionate and motivating and extreme, and like you want them to get Grimnir. At the same time, you're not quite sure what happens if they do. Or also what it looks like to live knowing that you're searching for your god, that you have a hand in his creation, much like the Sylvaneth did with Alarielle. But the thing is, like, Alarielle embodies life and is regenerative to the Sylvaneth, but no one really, I don't know, we don't really know anything about Grimnir to know, is he really going to be a benevolent, like, and repay them and kind of lead them into a new existence? Like, what's going to happen when he comes back? Because as far as we know, he's just kind of a hothead who went off and picked a fight that he couldn't win. So to kind of summarize it, the fact that they are operating as a godless culture in a narrative situation with heavy emphasis on godhood, and then also that they have an unclear goal. I mean, they have a clear goal in terms of getting it together, but what that means is unclear. I think the situations that puts them in make this a fascinating race to play in the Age of Sigmar. Now, pretty soon we're going to be doing a Star Collecting Box review for the Fyreslayers. Been asked that a few times, not as much. I know the Star Collecting Box reviews are not as popular, but they're really helpful for new people. I got a lot of things from new folks starting off, so I'm going to keep doing those. But thank you guys so much for watching with me today. If you have a question that you'd like answered, go ahead, click subscribe, leave it in the comments down below. I use all your comments as inspiration for future videos. Thank you so much for watching, and happy wargaming.